Good afternoon. It's Friday the 3rd of June 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today, Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the show.
Great to be with you again, Mike.
Right, we're just going to get straight into it, I think. So we're going to start with Syria and, of course, the Foreign Office, UK against Daesh or Dash or Dosh or whatever it is a Foreign Office Twitter account. And they're claiming that the Assad regime has detained hundreds of civilians fleeing Daesh in Deir ez-Zor. And they cite this article here from a news organisation called N.G.O. This is a Lebanese news organisation, Patrick, and what this is saying is that the Justice for Life Observatory is claiming that hundreds of people are being picked up by the Assad regime and put in a detention camp, or rather they're saying that the facility is akin to a detention camp, so I'm not quite sure what that means. But this is another NGO operating in Syria, one that I hadn't come across before. They claim to be an online source for news, and so at least now is the online source for news. They're citing this NGO, and they have now has people such as Michael Weiss, ex-Henry Jackson Society, writing for them as a contributor. He's former director of communications for that organisation, in fact.
It's a pro-Israeli think tank, UK-based.
Absolutely. Yeah, two issues here, Pat, really. First is, once again, without challenge, quoting an NGO within Syria. And secondly, what is the state of play in Lebanon with regard to these media outlets such as this?
Well, Lebanon's pretty open in terms of setting up NGOs. There's more NGOs per capita in Lebanon, maybe than any other country in the world. This is the NGO hub of the Middle East and in the MENA region. So this is here another partisan media outlet, and we did a little digging. We could see who was behind this media outlet, and you look at their stories and their editorial line on something like Syria, and it happens to be completely synchronized with the United States, the Foreign Office and the State Department in the U.S. So again, this is what we call the propaganda ring, where government is connected to either foundation-funded media outlets or NGO media outlets and NGOs on the ground who are also being funded by those same governments. So all the information just swirls around that little sort of, dare we call it we won't call it what swirls around, but that's what happens.
It is unfortunate that that as soon as you see the Foreign Office tweeting out a news source, we're almost at the point where that news source can be discredited straight away.
And what they're doing with this particular story, the Assad regime detaining people fleeing from Deir ez-Zor. So they did the same thing and saying that aid's not getting through. Aid's not getting through. So we'll have a quote.
Well, indeed, this is a quote from Philip Hammond yesterday, and this is talking about aid not getting through. So he's saying the Assad regime has cynically allowed limited amounts of aid into Daraya, but has failed to deliver the widespread humanitarian access called for by the international community. And of course, what he's worried about is the humanitarian access which is being called for by the international community there to protect their tame terrorists.
Well, what he's saying is that we need to open up the supply lines for the terrorists inside this held area, I guess. So they open up the rat line. So they use the same technique with Madaya before Christmas. They claimed that there was the government was sieging the town of Madaya in the northwest of Damascus, and that they weren't allowing UN aid to get in, and so forth, and therefore there was a famine, and there had pictures, phony pictures were posted on Twitter by a number of organizations and media outlets claiming that there were starving. It was like a Holocaust type thing. So this is exactly the same sort of playbook here. So they're not letting the aid get through, but the reason the aid's not getting through is because this is a terrorist held area, and the government is at war with invading terrorists in the country. I don't know how more simple the narrative can get. If this happened in Britain, if we had terrorists basically holding a city in anywhere in the UK, which has happened in the past, what happens? The army comes in and it's a siege, and nothing can get in and out unless it's through underground channels. So no different in Syria, Mike.
Right. So, of course, he's at the start of that quote. He says, "On the day of the deadline," and so what deadline is that? Well, this is the International Security Support. The International Syria Support Group, which he says agreed last month that if humanitarian aid was still being denied to any area by the 1st of June, that the United Nations would launch a program of emergency deliveries by air. So that's what's going on there.
Okay.
And he's saying that countries with influence over the Assad regime, such as Russia and Iran, must now ensure that air operations can proceed in a safe and secure manner. So they need to resupply the tamed terrorists, and they want Russia and Iran's cooperation to make sure that that happens.
So the rat lines have been cut off
Yeah.
by Russian airstrikes and Syrian army airstrikes, and they want to reopen or create an airlift for terrorist forces here. So this is just I don't know what to call it. It's kind of a vaudeville Punch and Judy act, pretending that these are moderate rebels and that these terrorists aren't being supplied by Western intelligence agencies and their sort of contractors. It's unbelievable that the mainstream media is still falling for the gag after so many years.
But America does have an anti-ISIL plan.
Yes, that's true. America's got an anti-ISIL plan. Now, I've looked at this article. I found it quite interesting. This is a mainstream Middle East correspondent here. His name is Michael Young. So he writes for the Daily Star and many other publications. So this is on The National. This is out of the United Arab Emirates. So he's a syndicated columnist, Western syndicated columnist in the Middle East. So he's saying that America's got an anti-ISIL plan, but it brings risks with it. And the reason I picked this article, Mike, is because it typifies mainstream media coverage, which is basically designed to completely put you to sleep on all of these issues. So America's anti-ISIL plan they're talking about in Syria along the Kurdish region near Kobani, working with the YPG to create the Syrian Democratic Forces, a brand new gang designed by Langley in Virginia. So the quote from this article is interesting. So he starts off, and this is how you can dissect the very subtle lines of what I think is propaganda, but this is a type of a gaslighting fantasy. It is in its single-minded pursuit of an anti-ISIL agenda in Syria and Iraq. Now this is fantasy because this is typical of a mainstream journalist who totally ignores that there is any clandestine involvement or elements at play in ISIL or ISIS or Daesh, or what do you want to call it, or al-Nusra, that the Western forces are not behind there supplying them with weapons or running air cover for them, or they're not being allowed free passage through NATO members like Turkey over the border and allowing their oil to be sold. So that's the fantasy. The fact is, and so he mixes it with fact. The fact is the United States risks creating a situation as bad, if not worse, than we have today. Washington may precipitate a breakdown in state structures in both countries that leaves Sunni communities. They're more vulnerable to extremist groups. That is actually probably closer to fact. Now, what he's admitting here is that the strategy by the United States to create a new counter gang and a new gang with the Syrian and Democratic Forces, a new sort of mujahideen comprised of Kurds and others. This is going to increase instability. This is going to make for more fighting, more street fighting, more lawlessness in both Syria and Iraq. So, but it's the mixture of fantasy and fact that mainstream journalists excel at, and this really puts the public to sleep on all of these stories, and you just graze over it. And this is what mainstream media does in print and on television.
Well, here we've got Sputnik quoting Harold Kujat, who is the U.S. Special Envoy for the U.S.-led coalition that is allegedly fighting Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. Sorry, I apologize, I got that wrong. He is the former Chief of Staff of NATO's senior military authority. So he's saying that any NATO involvement in the Syrian military campaign would bring more instability to the peace process. That seems reasonable. And Brett McGurk, who is the special envoy, was saying that the use of NATO surveillance aircraft to back the coalition could be brought up at the July summit in Warsaw. But Harold Kojat saying, in this pretext, it's really about making NATO part of the Syrian operation. But he's saying that this is creating risks because negotiations are very unstable. Well, so those are the risks. Negotiations unstable. The Americans not helping. NATO not helping. And of course, in response to that, America immediately sending another carrier group over to Syria to fight ISIS, apparently.
Yeah. Well, the joke is on the public, of anybody that believes any of these statements, because this is a perfect example, Mike. The whole concept of NATO. Oh, well, NATO's not going to get involved in Syria. Wait a minute, NATO is involved in Syria. The United States is leading airstrikes in Syria. We have special forces on the ground wearing Kurdish uniforms, by the way. We have Turkey, who is a NATO member, who's facilitating the free flow of terrorist forces for the last 5 years into Syria, into Iraq, okay? So NATO is involved in a big way. NATO countries, Britain is involved, so France is involved, so NATO is there. NATO is running the operation to destabilize Syria and parts of Iraq, and it's not even up for debate. And the fact that NATO isn't officially in makes no difference in reality to the people on the ground in Syria. And this is a perfect example of governments gaslighting the public, and where people can't even tell the difference between a glazed donut and a glazed donut.
Yeah.
They're both the same. NATO is in Syria, is in Iraq, and for them to come on and deny and say, well, we're not ready for NATO to come in when they're already in, is a perfect example of the PSYOP, which I think is running on the public 24/7.
Absolutely. Let's move on to Yemen then, because that conflict continues with continuingly almost no coverage in the mainstream media at all. But this perhaps on the face of it looks like a positive development, because the United Nations has apparently placed the Saudi-led so-called military coalition, which is, well, we have to laugh at France 24's coverage to a certain degree, because they insist on calling it Yemen's government. So the Saudi-led coalition is supporting Yemen's government, but the UN has put the Saudis on a blacklist over the deaths of hundreds of children. So there's at least an acknowledgement that the Saudis killing innocent bystanders rather than fighting any kind of actual rebels, and they're saying the UN saying emerging and escalating crises had a horrific impact on boys and girls. They're saying the situation in Yemen was particularly worrisome, with a 5-fold increase in the number of children recruited by armed groups, and 6 times more children killed and maimed compared to 2014. So that's a worrisome situation. Patrick, is worrisome the word that you would use to describe it?
No, it's a total disaster, Yemen. So where is the international outrage? Where are the UN sanctions? And what is this? A slap on the? It's not even a slap on the wrist. It's not even a slap on the wrist.
Because the United Nations, they put them on a blacklist, but they're not getting rid of them from the Human Rights Council.
Yeah.
So
the UN is happy to take Saudi money and to fund the UN Human Rights Council and put Saudi Arabia at the head of that organization. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is dropping cluster bombs on civilian targets. Meanwhile, they are bombing Yemen into the last century. No, forget the last century, back to the Stone Age. And this is a humanitarian disaster, millions of people being displaced every month, and this is all the international community. This is the same international community that Philip Hammond's talking about.
It is.
And where is the outrage? Where is the righteous indignation? It doesn't exist for Yemen. Why is that? Does that have anything to do with the fact that Saudi Arabia is the best customer for the UK and the US defense industry over the last 13, 14 months? Does that have anything to do with it?
And historically as well. Let's not forget Al Yamama. We've been selling arms to that country for decades, and in a particularly corrupt manner as well.
So that's the UN, this NATO and this Security Council, basically.
Yeah.
It's all about money at the end of the day.
Yes. Now, we've been talking about, over the last number of weeks, the response by Russia and China to the provocations that, of course, we say that they are making, or at least our government says. We don't say that. But here is another example of the response from Russia, at least. So Russia is going to be holding strategic missile forces exercises, over 50 of them over 2016. This is Nikolai Yevmenov reporting that the two Borai-class ballistic missile submarines in the Northern Fleet and various others are going to be in service and carrying out patrols, and with more vessels transferred to the Pacific Fleet later in the year. So Russia absolutely moving their assets around the chessboard, and they're saying that the strategic missile forces are going to hold, as I say, 50 exercises in 2016, 30 of them being snap drills. So they're clearly wanting them to be absolutely on the money and ready for any scenario that crops up.
Well, this is what Russia has been doing for the last 20 years, is reconfiguring its military assets for rapid deployment, so a lighter, more rapid reaction force. This is the thing that the U.S. and NATO talk about a lot in terms of how they'd like the future army to be. This is what Donald Rumsfeld's great dream was. But if you look at Russia's actually the country that's actually done this, and you look at what they did in Syria, they came in the fall of 2015, and they were out by the spring of 2016. So this is a rapid reaction force that moved in, did the job, and left. You know, it'd be nice if maybe Washington would take Russia's lead on that and leave after the job's supposedly done or mission accomplished.
But that isn't possible, Pat, is it? Because what we actually are running is a perpetual war. So the aim here is to maintain low intensity, perpetual warfare, and that means that the demand for arms sales never disappears. In the meantime, millions of people die or are injured, starve, and have hellish lives. This is the national interest, and this is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, and he's calling for an end to the U.S. policy of perpetual warfare. He's saying, since the tragic events of September 11th, a core tenet of U.S. engagement with the rest of the world has been deploying military force against terrorists abroad and denying them territory from which to launch new attacks. He's saying considerable data is now piling up that proves these non-stop military actions have not squelched the terrorist threat, but have increased risk to the United States. Flatly stated, evidence confirms the employment of lethal military power that we have relied on for the past 15 years has failed to protect America. It's important that the creators and practitioners of U.S. foreign policy at the State Department and the White House do not merely cease these counterproductive actions, but discard the Marshall philosophy that spawns these actions and replace it with a superior product. So that's pretty clear.
Well, that's perpetual warfare, low-intensity conflicts, but all the while feeding and nurturing the gangs and the counter-gangs on the ground that are able to keep the instability going. That's, I believe, what we're seeing right now in Syria. That's what we saw in Afghanistan for many decades. This is what we see in Yemen. This is what with AQAP, who is effectively Saudi Arabia's ground force in Yemen. This is what we're seeing throughout Africa. This is what we see in all of these conflict zones. So this is absolutely a policy of permanent instability, permanent destabilization, where order can be imposed out of chaos.
And if it's not a so-called civil war that's being created, it's a colour revolution. And here we've got another one. Now, we mentioned this some time ago, and this article here is from the beginning of May, how paint became a weapon in Macedonia's colourful revolution. So we've moved on from colour revolutions to colourful revolutions. And of course, this is absolutely Soros-linked organisations at work once again. Now, the BBC finally caught up with this today, and they published a video on their video report on the website, and here's a couple of stills from it, so we can see the activities of the protesters. And just to put this in a bit of context, this is where Macedonia sits in the Balkans. And I just wanted to highlight this article from Global Research, Color Revolution in Macedonia Towards a New Balkans War. And this is Andrew Korybko, yes, Andrew Korybko, speaking to the Macedonian National Press Agency. And they asked him, they said to him, according to some information in both the Macedonian and Serbian media, the Russian intelligence services are warning about the West's intention to provoke a Balkan war with a spiral of violence unfolding in various places, including Skopje and Belgrade. Their idea is to show that the governments of Macedonia and Serbia are weak and that they need foreign help or intervention or whatever it is they're calling their deviant attempts to manipulate and control other countries and nations. Can you share some more information regarding this issue with our readers? And he says, I suggested that Serbia and the Republic of Macedonia are each destined to share the same strategic fate in coming years. This is because none of these states are in the EU or NATO, and also because two of them, Serbia and Macedonia, plan to host Russia and China's multipolar transnational connective infrastructure projects, a gas pipeline and high-speed railroad, respectively. The US is pursuing a dual-track policy towards the Central Balkans, simultaneously trying to gain controlling influence over the three targeted states while also working to totally destabilize them. Washington would like to be able to seize control of these governments so they can exert indirect proxy influence over Russia's proposed Balkan Stream gas pipeline and China's Balkan Silk Road high-speed railway, or cancel them outright. But if it's not successful in doing so, then it would have no qualms about throwing these countries into chaos in order to offset these projects. So once again, we see what is behind the color revolutions that are going on there. This is regime change.
Yeah. So this is they're kind of upping the ante on the velvet revolutions that we saw in the last decade. These are a little bit more vociferous, and then you have the BBC cheering as people throw paint on all the national monuments and deface all the country's heritage. The BBC's there to cheer them along, and away we go.
And that is what it's about. It's not just putting some paint on the road or something. They are attacking the national heritage of the country. So it's about national pride and national sort of nationality and national borders.
They want to break that down, and then that will be replaced with to get the millennials in that country to clamor for membership to the EU. And how they'll do this, as well as they'll promise them fast-track membership in the press, like they did with the Ukraine. And you have all the college students showing up in Maidan Square saying, yes, we want in a future with the EU, but they don't get that future with the EU. What they get is a destroyed central government, chaos, anarchy, more corruption, and IMF loans on top of that. That's what you get.
Right. So we're getting this in the Middle East, we're getting it in the Balkans. Are we going to get it in Europe? We'll talk about that in a second. But just before we get there, Europe allegedly backing away from TTIP?
Yes, this is very interesting. Allegedly backing away, allegedly being the operative word, Mike. So this is an interesting development now. The timing of this with the Brexit movement in the UK is no coincidence, actually. But what we have, there's a kind of a quid pro quo, Mike, whereby early on in the TTIP planning, the EU was promised access to U.S. government contracting bids, which is hundreds of billions of dollars per year. Okay, and then in return, U.S. Big agricultural companies will get access to European markets for fertilizer. We're talking about Monsanto. We're talking about Cargill. We're also talking about food producers, cheap U.S. agricultural products to be placed in supermarkets around Europe. So that was the trade-off. Then suddenly the U.S. government changed tacks on this and weren't going to open up government contract bidding to your EU firms. And all of a sudden now there's no reciprocation with TTIP. So this has created a little bit of a problem in Brussels and in Washington. But the whole point of this, Mike, is now you can see what TTIP is. It's to reduce regulations, it's to lower corporate taxes, lower standards, okay? and raise profits for transnational only corporations, where they will flood the markets with their products and destroy any small to medium-sized businesses. And in the farming sector, you can be absolutely certain this is what will happen. You think small farms and local farms are devastated now? Wait till TTIP passes. That will be the knockout punch for growing local. What you'll be left with is some boutique products at a local farmer's market that'll have to be subsidized by the government just to survive.
Yeah.
And that's what you'll be left with. Just tourist kind of souvenir food, but no real production for and by local people, consumed for local communities. That will be finished.
Right. Now, one of the key points that I've been trying to make over the last number of months is that the EU referendum actually is irrelevant to this discussion. This is the document that David Cameron produced after he had finished his grand tour of Europe, the best of both worlds, the United Kingdom's special status in a reformed European Union. This is what the EU referendum is about. It's about this document, not about anything else. It's not an in-out referendum. It's actually about this document. The document makes it absolutely clear with regard to TTIP, concluding the trade deals already underway could ultimately be worth blah, 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 blah. These include the UK's top trade priority. This is the UK's top trade priority, nothing to do with whether we're in the EU or out of the EU. This is our top trade priority, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which alone, and they give some more figures which are nonsense and are just sheer propaganda, but it doesn't matter. That single line indicates where Britain's policy is with regard to these trade deals, and this will go through whether we're in or out of, or whether the result of the EU referendum is in or out.
Yeah, this is what it's all about.
Yeah,
this is what it's all about. So, and what people need to be reminded of, the Brexit issue is a red herring. It's a false flag.
A psyop.
It's a psyop. It's about TTIP. It has always been about TTIP. The timing of the Tories' Brexit epiphany should be suspect to so many people, as it's coming at the same time that TTIP is teetering on the edge of being implemented this year or next year.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it could run into problems, Mike. TTIP could be pushed down the road a little bit, but the infrastructure for TTIP is already in place. The policies are already in place. All they need to do is flick the switch on, and it's going to happen. So that is going to give that is the official corporate takeover. This is what the Trilateral Commission and Bilderberg and all these groups have been working on for decades, is this moment right now, which is the usurping of national sovereignty by a new corporate transnational structure. That is what TTIP is. That is what the Trans-Pacific Partnership is. It's about nothing else. It's about removing your sovereignty, your due process, your rule of law, and to supersede its sort of corporate transnational global entity.
Absolutely. So, but in the meantime, we have the clown show and a Thames flotilla, Brexit. What is this? What is this about? We've got serious issues that need discussed, and we've got people floating up the Thames in a flotilla.
This is like the Queen coming up the Thames in her flotilla on the anniversary of, was it Dunkirk? Yeah. The little ships.
Yeah.
And this is Nigel Farage coming up the Thames, waving like the Queen, apparently, and chanting for an EU referendum. And all I can say here is, I know there's a lot of Nigel Farage fans out there, Mike, but he is playing completely into the establishment's narrative on Brexit. And how come Nigel Farage should be shouting louder? All these people should be shouting from the rafters about TTIP, not about Brexit. Because Brexit, like you said, it doesn't matter whether the vote's in or out.
Yeah.
The real issue of sovereignty, I believe, is not with Brussels right now as much as it is with this trade agreement.
Absolutely.
This will transform life, and the unemployment figures are starting to come out now. I've read at minimum 1 million job loss. You know, under 25s in this country and all around Europe, the unemployment rate is skyrocketing. In some European countries, it's 50%. So can we afford to add another couple of million to the dole queues? Can we?
No.
This is what TTIP is going to bring.
Absolutely, absolutely. We can't have a day on or a discussion on the EU referendum without an intervention by a Miliband, and here we've got David. Our financial services will be at risk, apparently, if we leave the EU. This is just typical of the absolute crass low standard of the discussion on this issue. So Britain has the fastest growing financial services sector in the world, but a vote to leave the European Union would put that at risk, he said. Investment is encouraged, enhanced and emboldened by the UK's membership of the EU. Well, I'm not going to give this any more time because he's talking nonsense, and let's just remind ourselves of what we discussed earlier in the week. The UK, the most corrupt country in the world. This discussion was about the City of London and the financial services sector in this country, the biggest money laundering exercise on the planet, based in this country. So I'm sorry, Mr. Miliband, but if that's your best example of why we should stay in the European Union, I think you can take it and head off back to Hillary. Well, where I understand he's going to get a job if she becomes president.
Quite possibly. But, read the fine print on the Atlantic Trade and Partnership. Yeah. Read the fine print on TTIP. Reducing FSA regulations.
Yes.
Allowing American companies to enter the financial services market here. Allowing UK companies or City of London companies to get a better foothold in New York. This is about the global takeover of the Ponzi economy. Yeah. And you think it's bad now, it's going to get even worse. They'll be leveraging up, 100 to 1 in New York and maybe 200 to 1 in City of London. Great if minus interest loans, between banks. This is great if we could have access to this sort of financial regulations, but no, we don't have access. Only a select number of people, special firms, special individuals have access to capital.
Well, let's bring it full circle, because we were talking about the chaos in Syria and the Middle East. We were talking about the potential chaos with a new color revolution in Macedonia. This, I think, brings us to the point, because the only rational conversation seems to be coming out of Russia these days. Lavrov saying that Europe is turning into a region that radiates instability. This is extremely dangerous. We're seeing the situation in France with the labour strikes there. We're seeing this whole argument over TTIP. This is being done deliberately, I believe, to get TTIP through. It's to destabilize nations. We've got the refugee crisis causing the destabilization of nations and national borders. And Lavrov saying Europe is being turned into a region that radiates not well-being but instability. We're witnesses to major changes in the international scene. Russia is part of the global world and it's changing right before our eyes. He said that new centers of growth and influence were emerging and gaining strength, including in the Asia-Pacific region, but he was particularly concerned about what was going on in Europe. So these warnings aren't given lightly.
No, and the immigration issue in Europe, in terms of these corporations that will benefit from TTIP, they're looking at this problem as a boon for cheap labor. That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's a boon for cheap labor and for part-time labor and non-contract labor. And this is what these firms want, to get some kind of a competitive advantage. But also, they'll continue flooding poor countries' markets with their products. Former French colonies will get French products. Former British colonies will get British products. And it's just about opening up markets. And they will decide, the cartel of companies will decide who gets what.
Yeah.
Because that's what cartels do. They carve up markets and they say, well, okay, you're mafia and you sell this. I'm the mafia, I sell that. You get that part, I get that part. And they all agree together, and they agree to knock out all the competition.
Yeah.
Any small local businesses, local firms, they're out.
The map is divided up, the protection racket runs.
That's how it goes,
Yeah.
And that's what it's about.
Yes, okay, let's move on to a new subject. We were talking about this a little bit yesterday, but here's a bit more.
Yeah, so this is interesting. This is New York Daily News. So we were talking about the film Spotlight yesterday on a program with Brian Garish. So the Catholic Church spent $2 million on a major New York lobbying firm to block child sex law reform. Now, this just came out last week, actually, but it's kind of made its rounds through the media. And this kind of echoes what the point that Brian and I were making yesterday, and that, this is funny that this would come out. This should be, Spotlight got so much publicity as a movie, okay, which is a reflection of a scandal which happened before. And this story should send shockwaves through the mainstream media, yet it didn't. It is in a couple of mainstream outlets, but didn't get any of the coverage, not half of the attention that this film got, because it was up for a couple of Oscars.
Because we've got to present the idea it was all historic.
Yes, yeah, but the reality is this.
Yeah.
They're spending $2 million on law. What's even worse about this, Mike, is that there's lobbying firms ready to take up this sort of work. And I talked about the lobbyists yesterday. They're running Washington, D.C., and they are probably, in terms of prostitution, corporate prostitution, there is no limits for lobbying firms. To take up a job like this is pretty shocking.
Yes. Now, I can't remember how long ago it was, but it was quite some time ago. You suggested that just wait, it's only a matter of time before Trump supporters start burning buildings down?
No, it's Sanders supporters.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what's going on with Donald then?
Well, this is kind of very close to what I was saying, but so Trump rally in California is like the epicenter for anti-Trump activism. So Donald Trump, they're trying to make it so he can't have any political events in California. And so this was in San Jose. I used to live a few miles away from this for years. I went to school there as well. So they show up at a Donald Trump rally. This anti-Trump, and this gets violent actually.
So I see that at the bottom there it says protesters punch, throw eggs at Trump supporters. So we've got agent provocateur out. Are these Hillary supporters perhaps out to cause a bit of trouble?
I don't know if they're Hillary or maybe more likely happen to be Sanders supporters, but all organized through the Democratic Party machine via websites like MoveOn.org, which is a George Soros funded
So we're back to another
organization.
Soros N.G.O.
So what you see in color revolutions, in Arab Spring, and in Ukraine, what you see overseas, and I say people, if you don't pay attention to what happens overseas, you will get it in heavy doses at home.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what they're doing in America. Now, whether you agree with Donald Trump or not is beside the point. What you have here is you have NGOs funded by Wall Street billionaires trying to affect the outcome of elections by denying, whether you agree with this candidate's comments or not, but denying him or his voters participation in the democratic process, which is what happened in Georgia, which is what's happened in the Ukraine, which is what's happened in Armenia, and where's this, Macedonia?
Yeah.
So this is Color Revolution 2.0 at a neighborhood near you, is what it is. So
the U.S. is an embryonic color revolution going on right in front of our eyes.
Right in front. And you know what? This isn't the first. Get used to this, because this will be the norm for the next few years.
Yeah. Okay, completely change the subject again. You wanted to highlight this.
I thought this was completely outrageous of a story, but it's true.
So the headline is Tube Bosses Disgusting for Celebrating Ticket Office Closures, and that's according to the RMT.
So this is a black tie affair at a posh London venue where I don't know how many 50 senior TfL managers attended a black tie Mayfair dinner to celebrate the closure of hundreds of London Underground ticket offices.
Yeah.
Now, is there something wrong with this picture? Is this something you should be celebrating? I don't know. The raisin tube fairs, and I'm going to say this, Mike, they talk about, the need for maintenance. The need for new trains. And so London has the most expensive public transport now in the world. Number one. Okay, the infrastructure is already built. It's paid for. There are no big outlays. It's just a little bit of topping up maintenance that needs to go on, and they still need to have it as a personless service now. They want it run by robots and computers, basically. So
because they want to track your journeys.
Not only that, but they want to maximize their profits. And this is what happens when you sell off public assets to private companies, is they start asset stripping. They start asset stripping. Who built London Underground, Mike? The British people built London
Absolutely.
Underground. British taxpayers built it with their sweat equity and paying for it over the years. And the West Indians who helped build and run that, who came from Jamaica and Trinidad, okay, that's who built London Underground. The people of Britain. And then the recent government is allowed to sell it off for nothing to a select number of shareholders by invitation only, and then they get to asset strip that thing which has been built up. That service, it's not just the infrastructure, Mike, it's the service.
No, well, this is the model that's been applied to every utility, water supply, electricity supply. Thatcher started this. Gas. This is the model that's been used. They sell the infrastructure notionally to these companies who asset strip it. Who's left with the maintenance bill? The taxpayer. Who's left with the future development of that infrastructure? The taxpayer, but the profits have gone.
And that's why it costs £120 to get a train from Paddington to Bristol.
Yeah.
And it costs less than that to fly to Copenhagen.
Yeah.
That's what you get.
That's what you get. Well, look, we're going to leave today on what is perhaps a piece of good news. 2 Deutsche Bank traders indicted in the United States over LIBOR manipulation. This was yesterday. The department said that between 2005 and 2011, Matthew Connolly of New Jersey and Gavin Campbell of London, Gavin Campbell Black of London, worked with at least 8 others to fix the LIBOR, which was the interbank lending rate, if you remember. And they've now been charged with this and are hopefully going to prison. There is a continuing investigation in London as well. 20 people so far charged in that. It's a shame that it's taking so long to get to this point. But of course, the key point here is that these guys, they were at the bottom of the pyramid when it comes to this manipulation.
Traders?
Yes.
Traders who get arrested for LIBOR.
Right. So when are we going to see some bank management arrested for this?
Well, better 2 rogue traders than Martin Aegis or somebody like that. Yeah, well,
exactly.
You know, so no executives, none of the people who are actually doing the fixing, rate fixing on LIBOR. They walk scot-free. You probably see a few of them at Bilderberg this year.
Quite possibly.
Rogue traders.
Yeah.
Floor traders.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, they were responsible. They did it. Let's arrest them. Put them in a country club for 1.5 years. And their bonuses are still in
a pot somewhere.
Secure account somewhere.
We need to do something about these banks.
Yeah.
Once and for all. Okay, well, look, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for taking part today, Patrick. We'll be back on Monday at 1 o'clock as usual. Have a good weekend, and we hope to see you then. Bye-bye.